Deirdre McKenzie and Brett Wilson attended the University of Southern California, USC. Deirdre received a half-tuition scholarship and several scholarships and awards from the theater department that fully covered the cost of tuition, and Brett received a full scholarship to volleyball. Going to the same college at the same time, paying most, if not all, of their expenses was one of the few things they had in common, except for the desire to have children. Deirdre's height is 5 feet 1 inch. Weight, 105 pounds. Light brown hair, blue eyes, small A-cup breasts. Although she was a theater major, except for stage performances, she was an introvert and ambivert while attending USC. Deirdre had bad experiences with jocks during high school and avoided them completely if possible. She was attracted to guys of average height who were sensitive and trainable. Brett is 6 feet 5 inches tall, weighing 220 lbs, with blonde hair, brown eyes, an extroverted personality, who is good at hiding his intelligence with charm. He has a low opinion of people who regularly express emotions. He is attracted to tall, blonde women, regardless of their level of intelligence, and from his sophomore year of high school until his graduation from the University of Southern California, he did not date a single woman who was not blonde and at least 5 feet 10 inches tall. Even though Deirdre and Brett studied together for 4 years at the University of Southern California, they rarely interacted directly. They had the same English class in their first year, the same French class in their second year. They dated once as a couple in their freshman year because Deirdre's then-date was good friends with Brett, and in their senior year, they both attended Fed 12. Brett was taking a class to help recover from an injury, and Deirdre got there by mistake, thinking she was signing up for Fed 120B, regular yoga, but saw no reason to transfer since most of her classmates were women, and Brett, a wrestler and football player, was the only one male. They had one unusual experience that they shared. During Parents' Weekend in their junior year, they sat at the same table during lunch, and their parents seemed to be very friendly with each other. Also, Brett's mother talked a lot to Deirdre, and Deirdre talked to Brett. After dinner, Brett's mother asked about Deirdre. "Deirdre seems like a very smart and attractive young girl, Brett. Have you ever met her?" "Come on, Mom. You know I only like tall, blonde, busty women like you," he grumbled, blushing slightly at first. "You're terrible," his mother sneered, hitting him on the arm. At the same time that Brett's mom was talking to him, Deirdre's mom was talking to her. "Brett seems like a very nice, handsome young man. Have you met him?" After an initial slight blush, Deirdre replied, "Mom, you know that I don't date jocks." "It's a pity," Deirdre's mother replied. "He would have been a great catch." "But I'm not a hunter, Mom," Deirdre laughed. Given their personalities, tendencies, likes, and dislikes, it seemed ironic that during the last half of their junior and senior years, even though Deirdre had difficulty seeing the audience from the stage, she could have sworn she saw Brett at least 4 times during stage appearances in plays in which she had a leading or starring role, and during at least 5 home volleyball matches. Brett was absolutely sure that he saw Deirdre in the crowd, and he even asked one of his friends to secretly give her ticket to the sold-out final game of the year, which was the de facto conference championship. Brett and Deirdre seemed to briefly gaze into each other's eyes whenever they were close. Both looked confused and perhaps awkward. About 16 months after graduating from university, Brett married Cheryl, a 5'11" blonde, Busty, who graduated from UC at the same time as him, and Deirdre married Kent Carlson, her UC boyfriend of 18 months, who had just finished graduate school at UC Business School, a sensitive 5'8" guy. Brett was entrepreneurial, and soon after graduating from university, he started a business selling electronic goods. Cheryl was his first employee and ended up with 5% of the business before they became romantically involved. Because they were smart, hardworking, and pleasant people, the business quickly became successful. Before the wedding, they agreed to have at least 2 children, although Cheryl seemed less interested in this than Brett. However, Brett was, as Deirdre's mother noted, a great find, and not wanting to risk him losing interest in her, she agreed with a smile, and also agreed to a prenuptial agreement that released Brett's 95% share of the business from community ownership. Brett enjoyed his married life, except for fleeting bouts of guilt after sex with Cheryl, when he didn't think about her during the climax, especially since those climaxes were the most intense of his life. He maintained good physical condition by exercising almost daily and playing in an amateur volleyball league. It turned out that Kent also had good entrepreneurial instincts, and for 3 years after his marriage to Deirdre, his business appeared to be successful. Deirdre was able to continue her career in the theater, and although it did not bring much economic benefit, it did bring spiritual satisfaction. Her only disappointment was that Kent was not as supportive of her career as she thought and seemed to want her to either get a well-paying job or just do volunteer work. Apart from Kent's lack of support for her career, Deirdre enjoyed her married life, except for fleeting bouts of guilt after sex with Kent, when she did not think about him during climaxes, especially since these climaxes were the most intense in her life. Although she did not play sports and did not want to participate in competitions, she maintained good physical shape by doing independent activities almost daily, including cycling, jogging, athletics, and aerobics. Brett and Deirdre were 26 years old when Kent and Cheryl attended the same conference in Carmel by the Sea, California, an almost idyllic location in Monterey County. Although Brett and Cheryl worked for the same company, only Cheryl was interested in the topic of the conference. But Brett worked a lot and needed rest, so 3 or 4 days in such a picturesque place was attractive to him. Deirdre was busy between shows, but the Cat Theater in Carmel asked her to talk to them about the possibility of holding workshops for community theater members in the future, so Deirdre was happy to accompany Kent to Carmel. It was the morning of the second day of the conference that Kent and Cheryl were attending, when Brett and Deirdre literally bumped into each other as they left the same luxury hotel they were staying at. Catching her to keep her from falling, Brett smiled widely and said, "Deirdre Mackenzie, it's you, isn't it?" Hi. Brett, sorry, I wasn't watching where I was going," she stammered. "No, it's my fault. What are you doing in this idyllic place?" "My husband, Kent, is participating in the conference, and I specially went with him since I'm going to meet with representatives of the Cat Theater at lunchtime. I'm going to the city center myself. Do you want me to give you a ride? I've heard that parking is difficult here and there's no point in bringing 2 cars if we're coming from the same places." Brett chuckled. "But what if you want to come back early?" Deirdre asked. "I promise to fit my schedule around yours," Brett responded quickly. "Okay. I think it'll be more fun sightseeing with someone else," Deirdre replied, feeling her face turn red at the uncharacteristic sensation. Since USC, Deirdre had moved away from all the introverted aspects of her personality and was now a true ambivert. Brett remained a pleasant extrovert. Remembering what they did after college, they enjoyed exchanging ideas while walking around the picturesque city. When it was time for Deirdre's lunch, Brett had a proposal. "Deirdre, if I agree to pay all expenses, do you think the 3 people you're dating would be okay with me coming to lunch with you?" "I promise not to interfere in your conversations." "We can ask," she beamed. "Where do you meet them?" "In Cat. It's about 2 blocks from here." When they arrived at the Cat, they were greeted by 3 members of the board of directors, and they gladly accepted Brett's invitation, as long as the divvy, where they had a dinner reservation, could accommodate 1 more. When it turned out that this was not a problem, Brett was seated at a round table across from Deirdre so that she could sit between the 2 board members. After the initial pleasantries, Brett primarily watched and listened as Deirdre stunned the council members with her expertise and suggestions, and Brett was extremely impressed by her composure, and something else that could not be expressed in the form of clear thoughts, let alone words. The same problem Brett had with Deirdre at USC. After an enjoyable 90-minute lunch, diners headed to the Cat so the board members could give Deirdre a tour, with Brett walking alongside. After the tour, Deirdre took Brett's hand and said, "Thank you for lunch. And I hope that our conversation about the theater was not too boring for you. I like it. I learned a lot today, and I am sure that I will be able to appreciate plays more in the future," he replied. "Did you like the plays in which I played at the University of California?" Deirdre blurted out before she even caught herself. In fact, she had no desire to tell Brett that she had seen him in the audience at several performances. Brett's answer was even more awkward than Deirdre's question. They both blushed as he stuttered, "Yes, well, I think, I went with my companion to, a couple of performances at school, yes. You were really great." Deirdre quickly changed the subject. "Since you supported me, let's now go wherever you want." Taking his hand, she led him away from the cat. They ended up going on a 2-hour walking tour, which they both enjoyed, with several other tourists from England and Germany, and soon after it ended, they had to return to the hotel to meet their spouses after the conference day ended and have dinner that evening. During the return trip, both Brett and Deirdre seemed thoughtful. Finally, Brett asked, "Would you like to go to the beach tomorrow and rent kayaks and surfboards while our spouses are at meetings?" "Of course. With pleasure," Deirdre smiled. "Maybe we can meet in my car at 9 a.m., Brett suggested. "Sounds great," Deirdre smiled. After they got out of Brett's car, Deirdre said, "Thanks for the great time, Brett." And then she stood on her tiptoes and kissed him on the cheek. After dinner and dancing, in different places and with different participants, Brett and Deirdre retired with their spouses to their luxurious apartment. Neither Cheryl nor Kent knew what was happening to them, as Brett and Deirdre attacked them with the readiness of newlyweds, resulting in all four of them having a great night's sleep. The next morning, Deirdre and Brett met at 8:55, both looking forward to the start of the day. On the beach, they kayaks and paddleboarded, having a great time. When 11:30 arrived, they had a quick lunch at a hut near the beach and lay on the sand for about an hour to digest their food. At the end of this time, Deirdre, in her bikini, which Brett's bulging eyes behind his reflective sunglasses really liked, asked, "What else would you like to do today, Brett?" Something seemed to click in Brett's head. He slowly took off his sunglasses, looking at Deirdre. Then he took her hands in his, sighed heavily, and said, "I promised myself 5 years ago that if I ever got a chance like this, I would ask. Even if you end up hating me, I have to take this chance. More than anything in the world, I would like to have sex with you." Brett was prepared for almost any answer other than the one he received. After at least a minute's delay, with Brett and Deirdre looking at each other in silence, Deirdre replied, "Not on the beach? We need a hotel room, but not the one we stay in with our spouses." Brett kissed her quickly on the lips and then said, "Pack your things." 15 minutes and a few awkward glances at each other later, they found themselves in the motel room closest to the beach. It was clear to both Brett and Deirdre that they finally had to admit that they had been having fantasies about each other for years. Why neither of them was willing to admit, let alone act on these thoughts during their time at USC was unclear to both of them. One would think that after years of boredom, they would pounce on each other like a pair of cats in the jungle. Another surprise was that they didn't. Brett and Deirdre carefully but purposefully removed each other's clothes as they stared at each other in the motel room. It seemed that they looked into each other not only in the eyes, but also in the soul. When they were both naked, Brett lifted Deirdre into his arms, and they kissed tenderly. Not with animal passion, but in a subdued manner of adoration. When they broke the kiss, Brett gently laid Deirdre on her back on the bed, and they began to excite each other with mutual caresses. After their mutual satisfaction increased the sexual tension, they became entwined. Their intercourse was tender and passionate at the same time. Brett showered kisses on her face and neck, and she wrapped her arms around his neck, as if holding on to life. Although Brett was not boisterous, he was energetic. Neither lasted long. Soon Deirdre was screaming in ecstasy, and Brett's grunts were interspersed with exclamations of satisfaction and joy. When they finally came out of the euphoria of climax, Brett pulled away and lay next to Deirdre, nose to nose, both with smiles of satisfaction on their faces. Deirdre spoke first. I can't believe I cheated on my husband. I hate cheaters. But when you told me you wanted sex with me, the only thought in my head was that, for reasons I could never rationalize or explain, I had an animalistic attraction to you from the moment I first saw you. I don't think I ever thought I'd like Brett to ask me out on a date, but I often thought I would really like to fuck him. That's probably why I said yes, even though I hate cheaters. Brett's smile widened. I hate cheaters too, but I rationalize my feelings for you, deceiving myself that even reality with you is just a fantasy. I never thought this moment would come, but I often dreamed about it. My feelings for you are so complicated that they are unreal. I don't know if my feelings are lust, love, infatuation, hunger, or some combination. I may not be physically or emotionally attracted to you, but I am like a moth to your flame. The happy, embarrassed pillow talk continued for a few more minutes until Deirdre moved her hand to Brett's crotch and his cyclops instantly saluted. Deirdre giggled. This time I'm on top, and no gentle caresses like last time. This time it will be sex to the fullest. Deirdre's prediction was proven correct when the lovers experienced a mutual finish of such intensity that they both briefly lost consciousness. 2 hours after they cautiously entered the motel room, Deirdre and Brett emerged beaming. After their swim, they drove back to the hotel, with Deirdre's head on Brett's shoulder and his hand on her thigh most of the way. They parked in the hotel parking lot and looked at each other nervously. I think it would be a very bad idea to have contact in the future or even exchange phone numbers, Deirdre said hesitantly. I don't want to deceive again, but in circumstances like today, I wouldn't be able to control myself. Brett nodded his head in agreement. You're absolutely right, and I feel the same way. I have fulfilled my biggest fantasy, other than having children, and I don't want to ruin your life or mine. Then he looked around to make sure no one was looking and muttered, "One more kiss." They exchanged a quick but passionate kiss and then parted, vowing never to see each other again. After Deirdre showered that evening, Kent had another nice wild ride before falling into a deep sleep. Deirdre was enjoying herself, but spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, just like Brett had done after bringing Cheryl to 4 climaxes. 8 months and 8 days after the end of the Carmel conference, Deirdre gave birth to a frolicking baby girl weighing 7 pounds 10 ounces. When she first realized she was pregnant, she was terrified that it might be Brett's child, a possibility she had never even considered when she was overcome with lust while mating with Brett. However, her OB/GYN assured her, based on all normal signs, that she was pregnant before the conference. Although this was a great relief for Deirdre, she was still worried until little Carla was born. Carla had blue eyes like Kent and Deirdre, not brown like Brett and his parents, whom she remembered well from a long-winded conversation with them at Parents' Weekend during her freshman year at USC. Her OB/GYN did too, told Deirdre that Carla was clearly at full term. Her development had all the hallmarks of a full-fledged child, making it almost certain that she was already pregnant before having sex with Brett. Although both Kent and Deirdre were excited about parenthood, the responsibilities of raising Carla fell on Deirdre much more than Kent had led her to believe when they talked about children, both before the wedding and before she became pregnant. Kent was also not very supportive of Deirdre's acting career, but through her will, love, and ambition, Deirdre became an exemplary mother and continued her career. About 2 years after Carla was born, Brett was hosting a couple of clients, a man and a woman, in Pasadena. It was no coincidence that he met them there, even though his office and theirs were not in Pasadena, because it was the central location of all 3 offices, and for another reason, unrelated to geography. Another reason was that Deirdre was starring in Fernand Koppel's King Lear, a short play at the Pasadena Playhouse. After conducting business, Brett invited his clients to join him for a 6:30 performance of King Lear, for which he purchased second-row seats at the 86-seat Pasadena Playhouse, followed by dinner. They agreed, but they were a little confused by the fact that before the performance he bought 4 bouquets of a dozen roses each. As usual, Deirdre gave a wonderful performance as Liz Rico and received a standing ovation at curtain time. After the performance, holding roses, a dozen for each of the 3 women in the cast and the female director, Brett led his excited but wary clients backstage. Brett said to the security guard, "I would like to see the director. I have flowers for her and the women from the cast." This was a bit unusual for a board guard, but it was a change of scenery. So he agreed with Brett and soon returned with the director. "Hi," Brett beamed, extending his right hand and barely holding 4 dozen roses in his left. "I'm a friend of Deirdre Mackenzie and would like to see her and congratulate her on her outstanding performance, as well as give a dozen roses to you, her and the 2 other ladies involved in performance for a stunning evening of entertainment." Brett soon overwhelmed the director with his charm, handed out roses to the director and 2 performers except Deirdre, and then found her. She blushed when he handed her a dozen roses and blushed even more when he introduced his clients. When he told his clients, "I know I'm biased because Deirdre is my favorite non-family client, but wasn't that the best performance you've ever seen?" When the clients agreed, Deirdre's face turned completely red. Despite her embarrassment, she agreed to accompany them to dinner. All 4 of us had a great time at dinner. However, around 9 p.m., Deirdre began to fade after the intense performance and long day, and said she needed to go to the hotel. Brett dropped his clients off at their hotel and then drove Deirdre to hers, insisting she was safe as he walked with her to room 313 at her hotel. When she thanked him at the door for the roses and dinner, he said, "You look too tired to take a proper shower. Let me help." "No, you're a pervert," she grinned. "I remember what happened the last time I was in the room with you, and I couldn't walk normally for 2 days." "What if I promise to be gentle?" Brett begged, turning on his charm to maximum. Deirdre did try to fight off his seduction, but because she was tired and because deep down she didn't want to resist, she allowed him to take her to her room. Brett was very respectful as he undressed Deirdre, all the while complimenting her performance in the play and how sexy she was. He didn't try to fuck her in the shower or even really touch her private parts. I just washed it carefully and wiped it dry. However, after he dried her off, everything changed for both of them. Brett became sexually aggressive and Deirdre responded in kind. 5 minutes after Brett had dried Deirdre, she was screaming in climax as he caressed her sweet private part. Luckily, she was screaming into her pillow so as not to wake up the other hotel guests. 5 minutes later, she was riding him like a rented mule as he continued to caress her. Brett fucked her 2 more times that night, and when they woke up the next morning in each other's arms, they were as sexually satisfied as they could be, and the guilt had not yet set in. They dragged themselves out of bed and showered again, both too exhausted to have sex. As Brett got dressed to leave, Deirdre became serious. "I don't know why I let you devastate me last night, or perhaps why I devastated you too," Deirdre sighed. "But it must not happen again. If you come looking for me one more time, I will cut off your genitals. I hate myself for deceiving myself, and I won't let you manipulate me again." With steely determination in her eyes, she looked at Brett and said in a fake Italian accent, "Understand? You understand?" In Italian. "You're the best sex I've ever had in my life, but I understand, Capir. I feel guilty too, but I'm not sorry. I just regret not meeting you at USC. I know you were interested." After some delay and reddening of her cheeks, Deirdre replied, "Bullshit." "Then why did you come to my volleyball matches?" He grinned. "Because you came to my performances," she chuckled in response. Brett tried to kiss her goodbye, but she pushed him away. "I can't kiss you again," she muttered. "It's too dangerous." Brett squeezed her shoulder, smiled, and left the room. Deirdre had to take a nap before heading to the Pasadena Playhouse for the next evening's performance, the last of the short performances, and she was trying her best to put Brett out of her mind. As she and Kent tried to have another child, Deirdre was thrilled when she found out she was pregnant 4 weeks later. Again, she had slight concerns because Brett and she had sex without a condom, but 2 weeks before she had sex with Kent several times when she was in her fertile period. And that night with Brett, she was not in her fertile period. Period. Once again, her OB/GYN assured her, based on all normal signs, that she was pregnant prior to the night of debauchery with Brett, although apparently she did not tell the doctor about the encounter. Although it was a big relief for Deirdre, she was still worried until big boy Blake was born. Deirdre was relieved when Blake had blue eyes like Kent and Deirdre, rather than brown eyes like Brett and his parents. Her OB/GYN also told Deirdre that Blake was apparently born full-term and had developed all the hallmarks of a full-term baby, making it nearly impossible for Deirdre to believe that she wasn't already pregnant when she had sex with Brett. Deirdre and Brett's lives continued without further contact for almost 2 years before 2 life-changing events occurred, one affecting each of them. Brett was very concerned that Cheryl couldn't get pregnant even though they had been trying for years. Having children was one of Brett's main goals in life, and not having them made him feel like a failure despite his success in business. She and Cheryl were tested and were quite capable of conceiving a child, but for some reason it never happened. Cheryl was on a business trip when Brett needed to track down some charges on a business credit card he and Cheryl had. He knew she kept notes in a drawer in her office, but he didn't know which one. There was nothing of interest in the unlocked drawers, but after he found the key to the locked drawer and opened it, he found several folders related to credit cards. After finding out the information he needed, he put the business credit card folder back and saw a folder for a card he didn't recognize. He took it, opened it, and his life changed. It was a folder for a card in Cheryl's name, a card he knew nothing about. The very first document in the folder was a receipt from the doctor's office, dated just 4 days earlier, for a Depo-Provera shot. He didn't know what it was, so he took out his phone and looked for it. To his shock, he discovered that it was a well-known trade name for medroxyprogesterone acetate, a contraceptive injection containing the hormone progestin, and that Depo-Provera was given as an injection every 3 months to prevent pregnancy. Panicking, Brett dug into his credit card bills for the receipt and discovered a bill from the same doctor for the same amount as the first receipt, approximately every 3 months for the past 2+ years. "This bitch lied to me that she wanted children while still taking birth control," he screamed out loud. Brett didn't know what angered him more, the lies or the wasted time trying to conceive. Brett is a responsible guy. He immediately called Cheryl on her cell phone, told her as calmly as possible what he had discovered, and then said, "Get a lawyer, bitch. The divorce papers will be filed before you get home." Cheryl, desperate, returned on the first plane, but it was too late. The locks and codes on the house and garage had been changed, and even though it had only been 16 hours since Brett's call, his lawyer had acted quickly, and the divorce papers had already been filed. When Cheryl pounded on the door upon arrival, the documents had been filed, and the marriage contract had been executed. The divorce papers also included a letter from Brett terminating her employment and a check for a year's severance pay, according to her employment contract. Despite Cheryl's attorney's efforts to obtain court-ordered counseling, Brett never spoke to her in person again. During the 6 months that the divorce case lasted, Brett negotiated with several other companies to buy his business and sold it for millions of dollars by the time the ink was dry on the divorce decree. About a month after Brett found the receipt for Cheryl's birth control shot, Deirdre suffered a devastating loss. Her husband, Kent, was going on a business trip to the same place where his parents were flying on vacation on his father's private jet. Deirdre begged Kent to take a commercial flight as she was less than thrilled with her father-in-law's flying abilities, and there was a chance of bad weather on the day they were due to fly. However, Kent brushed aside her concerns and flew with his parents. The tragedy that Deirdre tried to protect herself from happened. The plane crashed during a storm, killing Kent and both of his parents. Unfortunately, Kent did not have as much life insurance and savings as Deirdre thought, so her economic situation, although not bad, was not easy. She put more effort into pursuing her acting career, and luckily her parents lived nearby and were very helpful with the children. At 8:30 on a Wednesday morning, 6 months and 2 days after Kent's death, there was a knock on Deirdre's door. Precocious and recently turned 5, Carla, despite her mother's insistence that she never do so, opened the door to see a tall, blond man standing there. After the initial shock of both the fact that a 5-year-old girl answered the door and her appearance, Brett found his voice and said, "Hello, young lady. Is your mother home?" "Who are you?" asked the little girl articulately. "I'm Carla, and I just turned 5 years old." "Well, 5-year-old Carla, please tell your mom that Brett Wilson has come and I'd like to talk to her." He smiled. At that moment, Brett heard a noise behind Carla and Deirdre's voice. "Carla, I asked you not to open the door." And the sound of footsteps. A few seconds later, Deirdre appeared in the open door in shorts and a t-shirt, no makeup, with disheveled hair, with 2-year-old Blake in her arms. Brett thought she looked amazing. "Brett?" a frightened Deirdre screamed, and then, stuttering, asked, "What, are you doing, what, here?" Which Brett interpreted as, "Why are you here?" A little taken aback by Blake's appearance, Brett calmly answered with a smile, "I hope you'll let me in so I can explain everything." I'm just trying. I need to get ready for an audition, and I can't find a babysitter," she stuttered. "Maybe I can help." He smiled, and then carefully walked past her and the children into the house. Deirdre was clearly embarrassed by her disheveled appearance and agitated by the circumstances, but was eventually able to explain that her nanny had canceled the appointment last night. Her mother had agreed to come today, but had woken up sick and did not want to infect the children. "When do you need to either confirm an audition or cancel it?" Brett asked calmly. "By noon," she answered. "Then let's see if I can establish contact with your children by then, and if so, then I can watch them," he continued. Deirdre was stunned, but wasn't sure she wanted to turn it down, as she really wanted the role she was auditioning for. He convinced her to at least think about it. As he continued, "In the meantime, I can help you prepare breakfast for them and tell them why I'm here." Okay, maybe," Deirdre replied. "I need to change my clothes first because I look—" But Brett interrupted her by saying, "Great, you look great." She blushed. Brett then sat down on a chair and showed some magic tricks to Carla and Blake, who clapped their hands happily. Then, after Deirdre showed him where the cereal and bowls were, despite his remark that she looked great, she went off to change into something presentable, do her hair, and put on some makeup, so excited that she didn't question why she was like that. Excited. While Brett sat and chatted with the children while they ate, Deirdre returned. She asked him in a whisper, "Why are you here?" Brett smiled and, between teasing and laughing with the children, said, "I was recently divorced, heard about your husband's untimely death, waited 6 months, which I considered a respectable amount of time, and then came to you to see if we could have a mutually beneficial long-term relationship. Are you trying to get into my panties again?" Deirdre asked, but not with anger or contempt. "Of course I do," Brett smiled. "But I want more. I want a loving, long-term relationship. I've denied that I'm attracted to you for too long, and I want to find out if my infatuation with you will last." Deirdre was confused, but at that moment, she had no intention of kicking him out. After all, he was the best sex she's ever had, and she hadn't had sex since 2 weeks before Kent died. So she changed the subject, and between talking to the kids, cleaning up after breakfast, and entertaining the kids at playtime, they talked about their lives since they last saw each other, including Brett's discovery about Cheryl and Deirdre's dissatisfaction with Kent's infrequent attention to the children and lack of support for her career. By midday, it was clear that the kids were already attached to Brett, so Deirdre got dressed for the audition. As she prepared to leave, she gave Brett her cell phone number, and he gave her the keys to his Corvette, while asking for the keys to her minivan with child seats in case he wanted to take the kids to the park or to lunch. Luckily, the Veda didn't have a stick shift, so after a brief briefing from Brett, she was off. Deirdre returned home around 4:30 and heard laughter coming from the living room. When she looked in, both children were sitting on Brett's back, riding him like a horse, squealing with delight. They paused the game to hug Mom and then went back to riding Brett until she changed into casual clothes and returned to the living room. The four then began to discuss what each had done that day. Little Blake was stuttering and talking so excitedly about going to lunch and going to the park that it was hard to understand him, and Carla was talking non-stop about the swing, reading books, and generally having a fun day. Deirdre quickly realized that Brett had given the children more high-quality attention in one day than Kent had in the last month of his life. When she managed to get a word in edgeways, Deirdre answered Brett's question about how the audition went. "Very good. I hope they call me back," she smiled. After the kids got cleaned up, Brett took them out to dinner, and when it was time for bed, both kids insisted that he read them 2 bedtime stories before they went to sleep, which he happily agreed to. When they were both put to bed, he and Deirdre chatted. "Thank you so much for today," she purred. "The kids obviously loved it, and you saved my life." Today during dinner, I got a text back, but unfortunately also another one from my mom saying she's still sick. So I was wondering, I was wondering if I could, impose... Deirdre hesitated until Brett interrupted her. "I would be happy to see the children again tomorrow," he smiled. "Thank you. You're so kind," Deirdre stuttered, looking into Brett's eyes and feeling her arousal grow before Brett stood up and picked her up. "What time do you want to see me here tomorrow?" he asked. "Wouldn't 8 o'clock be too early?" she asked. "Then see you later." He smiled, quickly kissed her on the lips, and left. He wanted so badly to have her right then and there, but he was playing the long game. Well, at least the middle game, and decided it was best to hold his fire until the right moment. Brett arrived at Deirdre's house at 8 o'clock sharp, and the children greeted his arrival with shouts of joy. It was clear that Deirdre was making a special effort to look good for him, and he quickly kissed her on the cheek and whispered, "You look amazing," making her blush. While Deirdre took Brett's Corvette to the audition again, Brett took the kids to the zoo, lunch, a children's amusement park, and, although they were too young, a miniature golf course. When Deirdre returned home at 5 o'clock, excited to have been given the lead role in the play, the children were already asleep, passed out from a long, exciting day. Brett bought some groceries and prepared dinner for Deirdre, and a simpler dinner for Carla and Blake after they got up from their 2 hours of rest. After another story, when the children were already asleep, Deirdre thought that Brett might leave again. With the shyness of a little girl, without looking him in the eye, she said, "You know, you could stay the night if you want." This was music to Brett's ears, but he wanted to tease her, so he said, "Oh, I didn't know you had a 4th bedroom where I could spend the night." And again, without looking him in the eyes, Deirdre answered modestly, "Well, maybe you could sleep with me." Brett walked up to her, lifted her chin, kissed her passionately, and then replied, "You'll have to sleep a little, sexy." He picked her up and carried her into the master bedroom as Deirdre whispered in his ear, "Please be gentle. I haven't had sex since 2 weeks before Kent died." "I haven't had sex since I found out Cheryl was cheating on me," Brett replied, although technically that wasn't entirely true, since he was using 2 call girls, both of whom, coincidentally, looked a lot like Deirdre. Brett was gentle as they showered and he washed Deirdre. He was gentle when they made love for the first time. He was an animal after that, screwing Deirdre twice in the middle of the night. After they finally fell asleep, Deirdre and Brett were rudely awakened by Carla and Blake jumping on them the next morning, thankfully without removing the covers which would have exposed their naked bodies. The children were delighted to have Brett there, but were eventually persuaded to play a little on their own while the adults got up. After the children left, Deirdre came face to face with Brett. "I want to tell you something that might make you reconsider your long-term relationship with me, no matter how great the sex is. I had my tubes tied after Blake was born, so I can't have children with you." "You already have 2 from me," he chuckled. Deirdre moved away from him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm Carla and Blake's biological father, that's what." "Why do you think so?" asked the amazed Deirdre. Because all paternal family members have distinctive earlobes. Look at mine and compare them with your children's, he laughed. Deirdre actually looked at them and touched them with her hands. They are similar, but this is nonsense. My children have blue eyes, and you and both your parents, I met them, remember, have brown eyes, so biologically they cannot be yours. My biological mother had blue eyes, Brett chuckled. Although Katie is a great mother and the only one I knew, my biological mother died when I was 2 years old. Since she had blue eyes, I have the recessive blue gene, and there is a 50-50 chance that our children will have blue eyes. Therefore, with your permission, I would like to do a DNA test to confirm that I am the biological father. A chill ran down Deirdre's spine. Brett kissed her and said, "Think about it. Wouldn't it be great if I was their biological father in addition to the adopted one I intend to become? Because I won't let you leave me." With that, he stood up, took a quick shower, and then went to make the kids, with Carla's enthusiastic help, blueberry pancakes for breakfast. Deirdre came into the kitchen with a shocked look on her face, just as everyone was finishing breakfast, although Brett was still keeping the pan hot and had prepared a couple more pancakes for her. Before lunch, the whole family went on a tour, and then Brett insisted that they go into the laboratory. Deirdre agreed. When the children and Brett had their cheeks swabbed, Brett paid for expedited DNA testing and agreed that the results would be emailed and then read back to him and Deirdre. When they returned to Deirdre's house, much to Deirdre and the children's dismay, Brett said he needed to leave for a few days to complete the sale of his business and prepare the house for sale. "I'll sell it, even if you don't let me move in with you," he told Deirdre, "but it's certainly what I want. Once the DNA results come back, we can test each other for a few months, and if we're half as compatible outside of bed as we are in bed, I'll want a permanent relationship with you." A shocked Deirdre could only nod her head as he kissed her passionately, hugged and kissed each of the children, and then waved as he drove off in his Corvette. By the time the DNA test results came back a week later, Deirdre, despite her initial confusion, was hopeful that Brett was the children's biological father. Statement, with a probability of 99.9999%. At the top of both children's reports left no doubt that it was him. She immediately called Brett, who she had spoken to every day since he left. "You were right," she said simply. "I'll be at your place tomorrow, and get ready for some hot sex," was all Brett said before ending the conversation. The next morning, Brett was greeted by laughing children. Handing each a gift, he fervently kissed the smiling Deirdre. After another full family day, the kids were put to bed. Brett read them 2 more stories, and then sat Deirdre down at the kitchen table. "During my absence, I kept my lawyer busy," Brett chuckled. "Here is the first document that, with your permission, will legally change the children's birth certificates, indicating me as the father. The second is a prenuptial agreement. If, as I hope, our relationship progresses to marriage, it stipulates that if I cheat on you during the marriage, you will receive $2,000, and the rest of the property will be divided 50-50. Since I seduced you when we were both married to others, I want to reassure you, because I will never cheat on you." Deirdre looked through the documents and then turned to Brett. "The marriage contract is not mutual. It does not provide for punishment in case of my betrayal. It needs to be revised to say that if I cheat, you will receive $2,000 of your money separately from the common property before everything is split 50-50. Now take me to bed so we can finalize these transactions and start determining, is our relationship long-term?" After 5 months of marriage, during which the children and Deirdre were the happiest they had ever been, she began to hint at receiving the jewels. Brett asked Deirdre's parents to babysit when he took Deirdre to Hawaii for a week, proposed at midnight while they lay naked on a blanket on a remote beach, and 2 weeks later, after buying a new, bigger house, they got married. Both grandparents were delighted with this situation. The 2 grandmothers had enjoyed each other's company since their parents' weekend at UCLA and had become good friends over the past 5 months, especially since Brett's parents had moved to the same city as Deirdre and her parents. Although they were initially shocked that Brett was the biological father, the grandparents were never interested in the details. They were simply happy to have grandchildren to spoil. 3 years later, the Brett Wilsons celebrated 6-year-old Blake's birthday, attended not only by a dozen of his friends, but also by Carla and her 2 best friends. As Brett and Deirdre's mothers watched the children play, how actively Brett and Deirdre participated in their play, and how lovingly they interacted, Deirdre's mother turned to Brett's mother and said, "It's a shame that Deirdre and Brett had to go through trial marriages before they got together. They have an exemplary family and are ideal spouses. If Brett had acted on his attraction to Deirdre in college instead of denying and ignoring it, they could have had 8 more happy years together," Brett's mom replied. "At least they're together now, and along with Carla and Blake, the 4 of them make up the happiest family I've ever seen, and that makes me very happy too," Deirdre's mom replied. Both she and Brett's mom tried to hide tears of happiness. The party was a fantastic success, and all the children left with bags of gifts and big smiles on their faces and heartfelt hugs from Brett, Deirdre, Carla, and Blake. That night after Blake's 6th birthday, when the children were long asleep, Brett and Deirdre lay naked in bed, nose to nose. My 19-year-old self would be appalled that I'm married to a short, flat-chested brunette who makes a living from emotions. What could I say to him to calm him down? Brett mused out loud with a mischievous grin. That she has sex like a bonobo, so that you can barely keep up with her. That's what you should tell your dim-witted 19-year-old jock, you half-wit. Now, take me and let me rock your world for the 10th time this week." Deirdre snapped with her own mischievous grin. "He did. She is too. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.